welcome indeed to Wesley Impact. In my thought for today, I'm going to be concluding my studies in Matthew's Gospel. We meet a family who share something of a very personal journey of grief and loss and their work with Wesley Mission in suicide prevention and postvention programmes. And as we draw close to Wesley Mission's Suicide Memorial Day, we meet Wesley LifeForce Suicide Prevention's Network Manager, Tony Cassidy. Tony, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Keith.
Tell us a little bit about what Wesley LifeForce is and how it began.
Wesley LifeForce was established by Rev Bob Dunlop, who was a minister with Wesley Mission in 1995, as a response to the youth suicide rates of the day. It was noticed the rates were increasing, and while Lifeline was in operation and there was a crisis response, Reverend Dunlop thought there could be something we could do to help prevent people getting to that crisis point. And Wesley LifeForce came about providing training in awareness and how to get people to the appropriate help.
And Bob's programmes, and since then, it's really been about that, helping people before it gets to the worst situation.
Exactly. It is a case of we want to help people recognise the signs of suicide.
Sure.
And be able to access the proper help that can guide them to work through those issues before it becomes a crisis point of the thoughts of suicide creeping in.
Yeah, sure. And the work that we do is not something that we do to people. It's empowering networks in the community who actually are facing these issues. So tell us a bit about the networks concept.
Yeah. So the networks started in 2006 as a concept in regards to Wesley Mission's involvement with community network groups to address the issue of suicide. It's essentially bringing together a group of people from service providers, local governments, police, ambulance, and other areas of the community, as well as individuals who have been impacted by suicide, to look at what are the issues locally, how can they address those issues, how can they raise awareness of the issues to reduce the numbers of suicide within the community. What Wesley LifeForce does is resources and empowers and supports those groups to be effective.
And as a Christian organisation, Wesley Mission is concerned to work with churches and ministers as well in that compendium of...
Absolutely, and often it's the churches and the ministers are the people who individuals at risk will go to.
Yes.
So we want to make sure that they're aware of what those signs are.
How many of these networks are there, just out of interest?
So currently, as of last week, there are 38 networks operating across Australia nationally. We're one of the few national programs that are funded through the Commonwealth Government. And we have, at the moment, working with another 6 communities to establish networks within the coming month or so.
And because I've shared with you in one of your training workshops with people, these networks are not something that have left out the Indigenous and Aboriginal communities, is it?
No, absolutely not. Well, when we're looking at where to establish a network, we look at high-risk communities, and the Indigenous Australians are a high-risk group. They have higher suicide rates. There are more suicidal risk factors that apply within their communities.
So let's get into what are some of the outcomes of the networks and how important is it for local people to be involved?
Yeah, some of the outcomes, talking about the Indigenous networks, there's a group just outside in a community outside of Nhulunbuy in East Arnhem Land that are currently developing a healing camp at an outstation, so about an hour's drive from Nhulunbuy or a half hour by boat across the bay, and where they can take the families and individuals that are at risk of suicide to the camp, work with them to work through and return, reconnect them with the culture and the land and the heritage.
That's a story of wholeness, really, if you like,
absolutely.
Isn't it?
It's not just addressing the individual at risk, but addressing also connecting the family to help support that individual.
Good. We're going to talk a little bit more about Wesley LifeForce, but before then, I'd like to introduce you to today's performer. Tilani Sen is from Victoria and has been part of the Melbourne Gospel Choir, which we're certainly familiar with on this programme, from its earliest days. Today she's also singing solo. She's chosen a traditional but very special hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus.
What a friend we have in Jesus. Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. Oh, because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Every trials and temptations, is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful, who our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Take it to the Lord in prayer.
Keith Garner's new book, A Word for the World, is now available. Dealing with the 4 themes of success, sorrow, society and spirituality, the 16 sermons in this book will definitely inspire and challenge you as you read. The book also includes a DVD featuring interviews with Nick Farr-Jones, Lee Hatcher, Tanya Plibersek and Margaret Somerville. For more information on A Word for the World, please contact us on 9263 5555 or at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
If you'd like to know more about Tilani Sen and her music, you'll find all her details on our Wesley Mission website. In fact, you'll see much of you need to know about our broadcasting and this programme. We're back with Wesley LifeForce Suicide Prevention Network's manager, Tony Cassidy. Tony, I suppose those words in that hymn by Scrivener that says, "There is trouble anywhere," well, we do know that there is trouble, often in people's lives. Tell us something about the statistics that people quote.
It's a lot of time there's a focus on youth suicide and the tragedy that is. We don't want to take away from that. But suicide doesn't discriminate. It's an issue for all age groups. It's the men over the age of 85 have the highest rate of suicide per 100,000 people. But it is a primary cause of death for men under the age of 45 and for women under the age of 35. So it is an issue across all age groups and across all gender and cultural backgrounds as well.
Look, Tony, I'm aware, and you've already hinted, that part of the groups when people meet together is to identify signs, to look for signs, and the ability to see what would some of those signs be.
So it may be something simple, like if someone's been troubled or been quite reserved and withdrawn, and suddenly they turn that around and they're quite positive and very upbeat, maybe because they have a plan in place. So they've got a direction, they know what they're doing, and often you'll find them giving away possessions or finalising financial matters for personal financial, and that's an indicator that maybe it's worth having a conversation with the person.
Well, that's very, very useful. And if somebody themselves found themselves in that situation, or somebody was identified in a loved one, how could they find help?
The immediate advice would be, if someone is at risk or in a crisis stage, to call Lifeline on 13 11 14. That's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service that will answer and support and help people in crisis. There's also other services that are available. Wesley LifeForce has developed a service finder, which is an online resource that can be downloaded onto your mobile phones or iPads, and that will
and that
pop
points you in different directions, does it?
If you pop in a postcode, it'll give you the services for that area that are available to you as immediate. Press the button, press the phone number, and you can call them within a matter of seconds. So if you know someone interstate that may be at risk, you can get the contacts for that area where they are located, rather than trying to go through the process of calling someone local and getting transferred those delays.
And you, among those kind of people that might be in the community, we think obviously of ministers and teachers, but you've also got people like sports coaches, haven't you? People who work in those areas with people.
Absolutely. The Wesley LifeForce Suicide Prevention Training Program, and it's targeted for gatekeepers. And when we talk about gatekeepers, it's people within the community who have regular contact with other people of the community. The local soccer coach who works with the young men or the young ladies play soccer, he sees them regularly. He notices the changes, he or she notices the changes in behaviour, so he may be able to help and support people. It's about training up the gatekeepers, the individuals, not to be counsellors, but to recognise that there may be an issue and how to find the pathways to the help for those individuals.
And every day people are confronted, and attempts to people to take their own lives every day are quite frightening high numbers, aren't they?
It is. There's no clear, accurate record of the number of attempts per day. The numbers vary, but the minimum number is around 40 attempts of suicide per day. We know there's 6 to 7 suicides completed each day, and they're suspected that that's at least 10 times that number as attempts. So it is
we're
a
a relatively small population, so that's a very, very high number, and it probably takes people back. I think at one time we used to use the figure at Wesley Mission, we talked about car accidents and people who died in car accidents, but I think that the skin cancer one is probably a better one, because I think we all know that skin cancer is an issue in our sunburnt lands. So when we talk about more people dying in this way, then I think that really becomes an issue, doesn't it?
It is, and we use those examples to really highlight what the issue, what a crisis this is for Australians, that these avoidable deaths are occurring. And how can we help to stop those? How can we be involved?
Look, it's great to talk to you, Tony, and I know that there are many plans to roll out the network even broader than that, 38 to close to 100 across the country, and particularly in remote areas as well. It's not just an issue for those that live in the big city, as we call it, but in those places. Tony, thank you very much for coming and sharing with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Thanks.
It's been 200 years since the first Methodists met in Australia. To celebrate 2 centuries of faith and pioneering care, CEO and presenter Rev Dr Keith Garner takes us back to where it all began.
But we don't begin here at the heart of London. We begin in a town in the north of England.
In this fascinating narrative, Rev Garner chronicles the history of the life and times of the founder of Methodism, John Wesley. This fresh and thought-provoking documentary takes us on a journey throughout the United Kingdom, beginning in John Wesley's hometown of Epworth.
John Wesley was born here on the 17th of June, 1703.
This 1-hour DVD travels onto his education years and beginnings of social justice in Oxford, to his final years in London. For more information on John Wesley, the man and his mission, call 02 9263 5555 or email us at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
As part of our work to support those bereaved by suicide, Wesley LifeForce holds annual memorial days in major cities. Our next service is going to be held at 12 noon at the Sydney Opera House on the 11th of September, and to get there you need to go to the Northern Boardwalk. These community events provide an opportunity for people bereaved by suicide to come together in a spirit, I suppose we'd say, comfort and hope. This is Bernd and Janine's story.
Do you remember someone who has died all too soon?
Sometimes it comes as a result of an accident. Sometimes people are taken from us by sickness and disease. For the Schramm family, their 31-year-old son Nathan became another tragic statistic of the greatest cause of death of his generation.
We really didn't have any ideas that Nathan wasn't well. The first sign that we got was a phone call. He just rang me this one day and said, "Mum, I'm coming home, my marriage is over."
Nathan got married the year that Janine and I met. As a person, Nathan, soulful, very compassionate, very caring. Yeah. He loved life.
He came down from Mackay, stayed with us for close on 3 weeks, and because he'd been around family all this time, he just sort of said to me, "Mum, I need to get away. I need to have some time to myself." And I think if I look back now, I just knew, and I just was powerless to do anything about it. He took the car, and I can remember him walking down those front steps here and opening up those gates for him, and it was the last time I ever saw him. His letter to me stated, "Mum, this is not your fault. I'd planned this a long time ago."
We invest millions to curb the road toll. We invest millions in advertising to encourage people to protect themselves from the ravages of the Australian sun. But how do you prevent suicide? At Wesley Mission, suicide prevention strategies began in the 1960s with the development of Lifeline after a desperate call for help. Since 1995, our operations have moved into a new era with Wesley LifeForce through suicide prevention training nationwide.
I don't know where I'd be today if it wasn't for Wesley LifeForce. It was only a couple of weeks after Nathan's death that I read an article in the local newspaper about a young funeral director, Janine Beatson, and she was just alarmed at the amount of suicide deaths that were coming through her doors. And she put together an suicide awareness forum in Penrith, and Vern and I, my husband and I, went along to that first night. And that's where it all started. Wesley Mission was there. I think it was probably within a few months we had a network put together. So I'm now very proud to be part of a network that is doing some absolutely amazing stuff as far as suicide prevention goes. Our focus this year, we're looking at schools. It's all about mental health and all sorts of issues that young teenagers might be going through, how they'd react to that circumstance.
Today, Wesley LifeForce oversees 27 community suicide prevention networks throughout our capital cities and rural and regional Australia.
One saved life is wonderful, and that makes all the difference. Every life is worth saving.
As I come to the last of a significant series of the journey of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, I turn to what may well give us an insight in something of the life of the early Christian community. The Gospel of Matthew was written at a time when the church was very young and encountering some of those early conflicts that may happen in any community that's stepping out. If conflicts are not dealt with properly, they can end up splintering, dividing a community. Today, in any leadership role, you have to be aware of the importance of conflict resolution processes. Let me read to you a process that's grounded in the wisdom and the teaching of Jesus. Now, I'm reading from Matthew 18, verses 15 through 20. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for them by the Father in heaven. For where two or three gather in my name, there am I with them. Now, very often people use that last thought as just being something about when people are there together in worship. It's very interesting that its roots is in a conflict resolution process. This passage is designed as a way of dealing with conflict and wrong in the church. There are a number of steps, but two principles in particular we must always be aware of. Firstly, we must deal with the matter both in terms of what's wrong and also in terms of the one who has done the wrong. We must go to him or her and talk it out. Letting conflict roll on only makes things worse. It's also important to recognise that when a dispute goes public, and that's really very sad when that happens, it becomes more and more difficult to be able to sort it. The other aspect is that if you can't work it out yourselves, then seek help. If the private meeting doesn't work, then bring witnesses or two, one or two witnesses. Such people must be noted for their wisdom and fairness. And the third perspective can often bring healing and purpose. It's only after this process has been followed that things have to be brought before a much larger group of people, described as the congregation here. Usually, if the first two steps have been taken, there is little needed for this more public pathway. I think these words of Jesus have more than common sense in them. And as such, it really is helpful in the way that we might run, engage, participate in our relationships with one another. It's interesting that one of the most quoted verses, it's part of Matthew, is for when two or three come together in my name, there am I in the midst. Well, it's actually in the context of conflict. God's presence in the middle of the conflict is critical. We don't have to continue in conflict. There are ways forward which bring us into a better place with each other. And that place of conflict resolution is so important, isn't it? How many people can tell stories of people that were once friends, something happened, it all broke down? How many people in a community can talk about the separation between people? And I'm not just talking about in churches, I'm talking about families, friends, and in the wider community. When Jesus speaks, he speaks with practicality. This isn't a story where there are 5 feelings that you might have in that moment. This is actually a pattern of how we might actually address it and how we might actually bring together people in a way that brings healing. And it's advice for me and for you. And that pattern is so important because Jesus is one who longs to bring forgiveness, peace, unity, and purpose.
If you would like to know more about today's topic or for more on Keith's message, contact Keith by writing to Wesley Mission, Post Office Box A5555, Sydney South 1235, or email impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
Thanks for joining us, and don't miss out that checkout of our great new website, wesleymission.org.au. We leave you with Ann-Maree Keith singing Rest in Me. Until next week, goodbye, take care of yourself, and God bless you.